Welcome to today's keynote. I'm your host, Chris Wofford.
Hi, I'm Nick Fabrizio.
And today we'll learn what it takes to establish a shared vision at an organization, how a multi-generational workforce can and should work in harmony with clear, unified objectives and goals. Sounds easy enough, Nick, right? What could go wrong?
No, absolutely nothing.
Good. I should mention that Nick Fabrizio, our guest here today, is faculty author of several online courses and certificate programs at Cornell. The Executive Healthcare Leadership Cornell Certificate Program is a URL that we will share, and perhaps through our conversation we'll talk a little bit about some of the courses and some of the work that you do toward that. First, audience, I want to make sure that you are involved throughout the conversation. We're going to be asking several poll questions, and we're going to be kicking up a QR code with which you will then get some interactivity going with us. So to get us started, I am curious who's in our audience and what industry you work in, right? So let's populate this one and get our audience going. We'll see how this one shakes out. So Nick, in the meantime, you come from a healthcare background, long and vast experience in there. I want to ask you a couple questions in one. First of all, what is or was your role? And for those outside of the industry, myself included, can you describe the particular dynamics that are in play within the healthcare industry? A couple things to think about, right? Economics, turnover, workforce pipeline issues, certainly nursing's taken a hit over the last couple of years, burnout, resource allocation, et cetera. Right?
Great.
Tell us a little bit about your experience, what led you to here on today's keynote.
Great, thank you, Chris. After graduate school, I worked in a hospital setting. I thought I'd stay in a hospital for the rest of my working career. And I stayed there for about 5 years, and then I went on to lead a large multi-site, multi-specialty medical group. Practiced for 10 years, left that and joined a national healthcare consulting firm where I traveled around the country working on mergers and acquisitions, strategic planning, and operational improvements. Then COVID came and kind of changed my life like it changed everyone's life.
Sure.
So that business kind of went away, and after that, I kind of did my own work, concentrated on Cornell, where I've been teaching for 20 years, and really broadened my scope. So now I'm doing, biotech, pharmaceuticals, a lot of startups, and the banking industry as well. And the one thing that I have noticed in the past few years working with clients is that although we're different, come from different backgrounds and different fields, a lot of things that we're going to talk about today, working with the different generations and culture and organizational change, are very similar regardless of the industry you work in.
So speaking of differences and similarities, here we go. So healthcare's represented the strongest here. In addition, so we've got information technology, healthcare, learning and development. I won't call out all of them, but we have a broad set of industries here, and I should mention, as we were discussing moments ago, invariably a global audience. So a lot of what we're discussing, just for clarity, is not unique to healthcare. Some of the topics and themes and concepts that we're going to be discussing today are not unique to healthcare, but universal.
Absolutely. I love the representation. The diversity is wonderful. And the yoga therapy really calls out to me. So that sounds interesting.
Good. There we go. Next slide. I want to get some more information from our audience because we are going to talk about generational differences, right? We have effectively 5 generations working in the workforce today. So I want to ask our audience, where do you fit in here? This will be interesting to see kind of how it works or how it shakes out. Nick, I want to ask you, is it useful to segment our workforce by assigning stereotypical traits, shortcomings, superpowers even among different generations? I should mention, we were talking about this before, I interviewed a faculty member years ago where we discussed the usefulness of using generation as a starting point for kind of understanding how people work or how they work best. Looking at things like whether or not coworkers are digital natives. Did they grow up with the internet? Do they come from the World War II era? How familiar are they with social media and technology, et cetera? So, Nick Fabrizio, I'll ask you, is it useful to segment workers along these lines? Why are we doing this?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit different here, and
All
this has really come from my work for the past 10 years doing some research and really being in organizations. And I like to say, while that's a good starting point, I'd prefer managers and organizations to be generational blind. And what do I mean by that? I mean, just as you said, Chris, in the beginning, this is the first time we have 5 generations oftentimes working in the same place. And the problem that we have is really, I get back to the foundation. People are the same. Who are we? How do we fit together? Who do we want to work with? What are the goals of the organization? And it's very difficult if you have a leadership team or your manager is just catering to one of the generations. So for example, if you have heard that we have to keep our millennials happy or our Generation Xers happy, and we've got to do new programs, new services, we always have to reach out to them to comfort them, to make them feel good about the organization, to give them a sense of belonging. And if we do that at every staff meeting, and you're in the baby boomer generation or you're the millennial generation, and you continually hear that, and no one's really, what you feel is looking out for you, you become to feel you feel disconnected, and that's really important, and it leads to a lot of turnover and people not feeling vested in the organization. So I would rather you be generational blind and start with the framework: what makes us not different, what makes us the same.
Right, and of course, it depends on the type of organization. It's relative youth or trajectory on its long-term business cycle. I think you know what I'm getting at here, which is representation, right? And so, as it turns out, in today's keynote, we're 55% Gen X. We've got Gen Z, very few young viewers today.
Right.
Just something to note as we kind of talk about this. So one aspect or one key part of the big part of the conversation here is work-life balance and expectations as they relate to generation expectations, right? So tell us a little bit about how that trickles down. The work-life balance, generational representation trickles down to like motivation, recruitment, retention, some of the key things that you have to consider when you're an employer.
Right, and that's why it gets back to where we started in being generational blind. I mean, people want, at the end of the day, they want to be involved in work that matters to them. They want to feel important, that their job is important, that it contributes to the whole. They want flexibility. They want to feel support. They want to feel connected and treated fairly. So they want value from the organization, and they want to feel like their employer treats them special, but doesn't treat others, let's say, more special or much different than they're treated. So we've got to think about and to figure out how to bring people together and to concentrate on the commonalities.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of commonalities and participation, et cetera, audience, I am interested in your questions. I've got an iPad sitting here waiting for them. So please enter your questions in the chat, and I'll take them as they come through. Back to work-life balance, Nick. It's been upended. It's been rethought entirely over the last 3 years due to the onset of COVID back in 2020. Where are people at with work-life balance now? What are the considerations, not only in healthcare, but in other industries as you see it?
Yeah. Chris, people have been on this roller coaster. Mm-hmm. So they were used to, we never even thought about a hybrid or working remotely before COVID.
Nope.
Right? People just went to the office and they worked 4 or 5 days, and maybe they got lucky and had an employer that would give them Fridays at home or Mondays at home. And then COVID hit and everyone was working from home. And it was very difficult to get to the office. And so just think about how people worked and acted and reacted. It really was based on getting to the office, putting in a good day's work, making connections at work, and then leaving and going back home. And so we went from that to working remotely. And now we have organizations who are forcing people to come back to the office. Mm-hmm. So think about that. For an employee who was working at their job, going into the office 5 days a week, now working remotely for 4 or 5 days a week, and now being told, come back to the office for 3 or 4 days. And so you're juggling family responsibilities, personal connections, and that gets disrupted. So that leads to a lot of frustration for employees, and you see that in a lot of turnover now, because people now, employees, they're at a premium, and they're starting to look at, well, what organization out there will I be happy in, satisfied with, that'll let me work from home 3 days a week? And so there are totally new dynamics that are at play now.
And I think a lot of us, whether it's family, friends, colleagues, everyone we work with or socialize with, understands what's going on the employee side. It's the employer side that's getting very tricky, right? So we were talking earlier about, and this is an emergent theme that I've heard over the last 3 years, which is to be an attractive employer, you've got to offer, something close to total flexibility. And you also have to watch your competitors very closely. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Right. So the organizations that I have seen that I think are on the leading edge of this are trying to find that balance. Let's say there's a department of, 100 employees or 50 employees. How many of the total number of employees would be required to be at work? to be in the office. And let's say that's 5 days and 4 days. And then do you have another subset of employees in that department or organization wide that you can create positions for where maybe they're at work 3 days and remote 2 days? And maybe you have other jobs that they could be remote 4 or 5 days. So employers are really focusing now, and they're being forced to, because of recruitment and retention, to change the nature of the job and the scope of the job to say what can be done in the office and what can be done remotely, because we're going to have a segment of the population that wants to work remotely. So these are totally new dynamics now.
Yeah, and speaking of the old dynamics, you suggested back to a point that you made a little bit ago, which is, not looking at differences among generations at all, but rather the similarities. And sure, the basics are, I want to get paid, I want time off, I want to be treated with respect, and all the other, sort of top 10 hierarchical things. How do you like to think about it? Like, let's go back to that theme, right? Not think about the differences so much like we just saw,
right,
but the similarities.
Right. So I always give the managers that I work with or the leaders sort of a call to action. And I say, so if you're just thinking about recruitment and retention, how do you think you could change your job, or what would you change in the organization to allow you the flexibility to make changes that would improve your recruitment and retention? And that goes back to, okay, so I have a group of employees here. How do I make them feel connected with work and connected with each other and respect me as a leader, and they can think that I'm really helping them, I'm doing everything that I can to make them feel more satisfied at the workplace? And that gets back to where we started. Think, what are the commonalities that we all have? Do we want to be treated with respect? We wanted fairness. We want an employer that hears us, that responds to our needs. And the organizations that I think that are on the leading edge of that are the ones that listen to their employees and where they can to make changes so they're more responsive to their employees.
Right. Back to the broad, every once in a while we're going to have to kick up to high level and think about this, right? So viewer Carolyn Bernard checks in and says, I'm interested in hearing thoughts related to designing and implementing DEI initiatives and a culture of belonging from a generational perspective, knowing we have more generations in the workplace than ever before. So this is a pillar of the conversations that are going on in organizations. What do you think about what Carol just chimed in and said?
Yeah, Carol, I think that's a great question. And I go back to, okay, so leadership has a role in this. And to bring that organization together, do the employees have a role, and what role do they have? And how do you get them to feel involved? Because what we want to do when we're working in this multi-generational workforce is we want to make people feel connected. And this gets back to a lot of employee surveys where they say, my boss never listens to me. They create policies and procedures. Nobody knows where they came from, but now I'm following them. So when we get back to sort of the heart of that question is what does the organization deem as important? Why do they say that? And how do they get employees involved with that so it really comes from the ground up? So the employees feel like they're a part of whatever decisions and policies and procedures that are made.
I like to take these in real time. Ken just checks in and says, are you able to comment on the current staff shortage? Now remember, we're talking to a global audience.
Exactly.
Staff shortages and workplace dynamics, unemployment versus employment is different everywhere. But let's talk about it as if we are a global audience here. Are you able to comment on the current staff shortage in the workforce? Is it draining on employers? And Ken wonders what the trend will be like in the next few years. So let's think about healthcare where there's a staff shortage. Nursing seems to be a thing that's been hit pretty hard in the last couple of years. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Ken. I think healthcare, now I'll say it's similar to the banking industry, which I know a lot about too, and that gets down to the nature of work. So if you think about nursing and others in healthcare, not just nurses, in the healthcare profession, they're tired from COVID, and it's kind of like post-traumatic stress, right? So they're trying to get back to this new normal. But across all industries, it's what is this new normal? And I think the hard part now for leaders is understanding that the traditional and maybe once typical 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or 40-hour work week is going to change. And there's going to be a large segment of the population that says, you know what, 30 hours a week is enough for me. Because the difference between 30 to 40 and my lifestyle and what I want to do isn't really that great. So if I can find an employer that offers 30 hours a week or 25 hours a week, I'm interested. The problem with that is we've got kind of the status quo, and a lot of these old and established organizations, not just healthcare, all organizations, that have their job postings, and you can see those. They're full-time. They either say a mix of some hybrid or remote or in the office, but most of them are 40-hour work weeks. So I think we have to be able to flip that and to say, you know what, there's this new normal, and maybe it's 20 hours or 30 hours a week.
Yeah, we'll see. It's been decades, this conversation, but
right.
We'll see where it goes. Great question from Marcia. I love this one. Who asks, does recruitment look differently for individuals by age grouping? How do I need to alter my recruiting efforts to capture all age groups? And is that a viable strategy?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And the people in human resources that I've worked with say, my job was hard enough before, when I had this recruitment strategy and it involved all the generations. And now I'm trying to come up with different strategies that target different generations or different segments. It's really hard to do that. I get back to sort of the mission, vision, values, which I know we're going to talk about. What are the mission, vision, values of the organization? And realize that those are going to be different from your departmental culture and values and vision as well. So there's this real dichotomy in organizations between the organization or corporate culture, mission, vision, and departmental, which flows down to the individual. So I think for the human resources professionals, it's extremely difficult. But I think that we're going to, in the years to come, redefine work, meaning what does the work week look like? And we're going to have to be flexible as leaders in crafting positions that aren't 40 hours. And I remember when I was a manager years ago, and the big thing was part-time workers or job sharing. And so the whole thing was trying to find workers who wanted bits of a job and put them together. And the audience knows from those who are managers, now instead of managing one person that's working 40 hours, you're managing two people that work 40 hours. So multiply that by 100 positions, and your job is exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Thinking about Marcia's task, right? ChatGPT, write a job description for a millennial. Go ahead and see what kicks out.
Exactly.
I mean, that might be a place to start.
That's right. And maybe the computer can do all the work, too.
It probably could.
Right.
So I'm going to follow your lead. Let's talk about organizational cultural values. This is often abstract. It's unclear. It's difficult to define. Is that how it should be?
It's really difficult. It kind of leads into our discussion of not only culture but the competing values map, and where you are as an individual and how you fit in the organization. So this is really takes some soul searching and some self-reflection on how you like to work. What motivates you as an individual, what drives you, what will make you attracted to an organization and stay in the organization, because oftentimes what you want from an organization is going to be completely different than what the organization wants from you. And that's the crossroads that we are going to struggle with in the future.
Organizational values map. Here we go. What are we looking at here? What's this for?
Right. So this is, I like to tell not only my students, but the organizations I work with, where are you in this? And people can quickly identify, not only from an organizational standpoint, but from an individual standpoint. So if you look at that quadrant in the upper left, this is the human relations model, and it's based on collaborations. We do things together in our department or in the organization. If we look to the right, that's an open systems model. That's more creative. We do things first. You'll see more firms that are in research and development, new product development. A lot of startups are in this creativity. They're also down below in doing things fast. This is a competitive environment. It's the rational goal model. And so again, you'll see startups in there. It's really being quick to market, first or second, but certainly not a laggard. And not at the tail end of work and development. In the lower left, you see do things right, and this is sort of the internal process model. It's based on control and the hierarchy. So the people in healthcare will be able to quickly identify themselves in here because it's based on a structure, a formal structure, a hierarchy, very top down. This is the way things are done. This is my box. This is where I fit in this box. And to get things done, I have to go to the box on top of me, and they have to get approval from the box on top of them. And so it's very hierarchical. So what I like to tell people is, what do you thrive in? If you had to put yourself in this competing values map, where would you put yourself? And is that different than where you are in your department working right now? And if you think about that, is that different than where the organization in general is? And Chris, this is the real hard part, because you can be in a organization with 50,000 employees or 20,000 employees, and you're in different states. You may have corporate headquarters in Florida or Texas or California, and you may be in Boston. You may be in South Dakota. And so the culture that you have or where you fit could be much different than corporate. Similarly, if you're in a startup and maybe there's 5 or 10 employees, you are in this collaborative human relations model where you do things together, you feel like you're part of a team, decisions are made together, you feel really good about that environment. Now, if someone pulls you out of that environment and puts you down in the hierarchy, you're not going to be very happy. So that's the struggle that we have, and it's getting back to identifying where you are, how you thrive, and where does the organization put you right now.
I think this thing is useful. I would kind of be inclined to keep it up all show, but we can't talk about that the entire time. I've got a couple people who are chiming in, kind of going back to the hybridization model, tensions therein, how to become an attractive employer, and so on. I'm going to offer you a two-part, because two people are asking kind of the same questions. Bob checks in and says, there's a disconnect between those who work at home within the company and people who have to be on site all the time. There's a generational gap between the people doing the labor and those working remotely. How do you build a connection between the two? And then Jim asks, the company I work for has a CEO that wants people in office, but many were hired during COVID while we were remote. How best to transition to a hybrid environment from a messaging standpoint? First of all, how do you address the tension between those who are remote, required to be on site? And from a leadership standpoint, how do you message around that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and organizations struggle with this. The quick answer is there is no quick answer. There's no easy answer. But when you think about the psychology of people and the psychology of work, to try to get people, now some people will do better in the office and they prefer that, and their organization prefers them to be in the office, and obviously you have those connections. Chris, if I'm with you every day and we're in this office, we can do a lot of things together. It's easier to communicate with you. It's easier to find out when things aren't going as planned, and we can make course corrections sort of in real time. Mm-hmm. But if we're remote, you've got to message me or call me. I may get to it right now. I may not. It certainly probably won't be right now. But there's going to be a variation of the connection that we have with each other and the connection we have in the organization. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just different. The psychology of it is, the difficult part of this is, when I've interviewed employees and asked them about connection, a lot of them will say, well, you know what? I'm really not looking for that. And if we think about sort of like back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Sure, right.
Do we need this sense of belonging? Well, you know what? I'm kind of happy at home. I found going into the office was a waste of time. There was too much water cooler talk. I wasn't productive. Sure. So I'm more productive now being at home, but I'm less connected. And while other people may struggle with that connection because maybe we don't do as well as a team, me as an individual feels just fine in this new arrangement. The crossroads, the difficult part for the employer is that okay? Is it okay for teamwork? Is it okay for performance? And maybe the organization will have to find a new me because I'm happy not going to the office anymore. And if I can't be with you because now you're requiring me to be back in the office, chances are I'm going to look for a job where I can be at home and work, and it may be in a totally different field. And that's, I think, what's different now than pre-COVID, because people got used to, you mean I can work from home? You mean I don't have to come to the office anymore to work, and things can still happen? And so this is again a crossroad that we can't force people. The old saying, you can't force people to do what they don't want to do. Maybe you can for a little while, but they're going to revert back to finding an organization and a job that makes them happy, and that may not be back in the office.
Right, and that might be related to role and understanding what your role is, and the degree to which leadership values that role. We have to be here on site. We're all working in person. I happen to thrive in this environment. I like connection. It's crucial to everything I do. You know what I mean? And I totally understand that others don't need any of this.
Right.
I'd rather they were at home because they're happy and they're productive in that environment. There's no easy solution. It's just we're in a quandary.
Exactly. When I was a consultant, so I would work with health systems around the country, and there was a portion of that was important to be on site. I had to be on site for a lot of the work. Then I'd go back home or to the office, and I'd do my off-site work, and then travel back to the client and be on site. So really, I was working in a hybrid environment. But that was the environment that I chose. And for someone to say, okay, now I'm going to pluck you out of that environment and you're going to go 5 days a week in an office, no matter what you could do for me as an employer, I'm not going to be happy in that environment. So sometimes for the leader and administration to say, you know what, there's only so many things I can do, and I'm never going to make everyone happy or this employee happy. They may have to go somewhere else, which is good for them and probably good for the organization.
Perfect. All right, let's move on. I want to talk about decision making a little bit. I find this to be let's see. Sorry, I want to back up a little bit to this slide here. Okay. How involved are you in decision making? There's more to this than meets the eye, but I will ask our audience just to chime in. I make a lot of decisions. I make decisions occasionally. I never make big decisions. Yes, we all make decisions, but we're talking about decisions that might impact what is ultimately a shared vision in our organization. Big impact decisions.
Right.
Primarily.
Well, exactly. And we see by the audience so far, 60%, they make a lot of decisions. So, that's great. Now, if I took 60 or 65% of the workforce, and let's say, by the sounds of that, you're let's say in that quadrant that we referred to earlier, you're in the collaborative environment.
Yep.
You make decisions, you make them together. If I pluck you out of that and put you in a hierarchy, where now maybe you make decisions, but they're small scale, and maybe other people are making decisions for you, you're not going to be that happy. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be as happy as if you're in this collaborative environment or that you can make a lot of decisions. So a lot of time it depends on, are you answering the question, are you speaking as an employee or as a manager? And that's going to dictate a lot of what happens in your department or organization at wide.
Yeah, sure. And keeping in mind that 55% of the respondents here are Gen Xers who are in their 40s, 50s in many cases.
Right.
Hope or at least aspire to have some agency in making decisions. Right.
I'm sure they're managers or leaders or C-suite, so they can make a lot of decisions. I think the struggle for them is, how do I get employees, which we always say in shaping culture, how do you get employees involved in the decision making? Even though you know that maybe they're not going to make the decision, but how do you get them involved, invested in the organization so they feel like they have a significant role to play in the decisions that are made?
Mm-hmm. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about workplace culture, strategy, high-level thinking from an organizational standpoint. And I want to ask our viewers here about communication. This is a big thing. And you have some interesting points to talk about communication, how it should be conducted, either departmentally, highest level, large company, small company. But let's find out a little bit about what our audience is kind of feeling about this. But you had mentioned, and we were looking at the graphic there moments ago, how organizational structure may impact communication. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think by the responses right now, I love that. I wish it did, but I think the telling thing that I see as I travel in organizations and hear from a lot of my graduate students is that the communication in the department does not work the same as it does in the larger organization.
And maybe at its best by design, right? We can't communicate in the same way.
Exactly. And it's funny because it reminds me of my strategic planning sessions that I do in organizations. So if you work, a lot of people will say, well, I'm in XYZ department. I really have no involvement in strategic planning because the organization does it. They have their priorities. They say what the goals and objectives are. But then I have other managers who say, you know what, I run this department differently, and I'm able to do that because I've checked with my superior, and they say I have freedom or leeway to do X, Y, and Z. So they develop strategies and a strategic plan, and they have a culture that's very different as a department than the rest of the organization. And I think this question that the audience just answered really speaks to that, is can you have flexibility and a leeway to make your department different from the organization? So the organization may act, react, and have a certain culture, but can you do enough things in your department to make a significant change? That, by the way, Chris, will impact recruitment and retention. Can you make it a little bit different and maybe more responsive and put your stamp on it as a manager so that it does stand out from the organization?
Yeah. So tell us how leadership style and approach to decision making can impact, again, employee satisfaction, recruitment, and retention. What do we mean by that? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so a great example of this is, when I've traveled and I've worked in departments and we say, well, how involved are your employees in decision making? And the managers say, oh, they're very involved. And then you talk to the employees and they say, I'm not involved at all. Decisions are made. We have no staff meetings. We don't get together as a group. Nobody knows what I'm thinking. And that's really the disconnect that I see regardless of the industry. So not just healthcare. I've seen it in pharmaceuticals. I've seen it in banking. I've seen it in biotech. And that is, do we want a participative environment? Do we want our employees involved in decision making? Do we have staff meetings? So a few of those organizations I went to, the employees said, well, we've never had. I said, you've never had a staff meeting? I say, no, we've never have, you have once a month. Some organizations do a monthly. Some organizations that I've worked with do them weekly. And that's just, here's the decisions that are coming down the pike, says corporate. I'd like your input on it. We have time as a department to make some changes based on what you tell me works and doesn't work. We can do this now rather than wait 8 months from now when edicts are just handed down from corporate saying, this is what we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. So it really, how you function at work and how your department acts and reacts really impacts your employees and you as a manager trying to get people involved in the decision making. And you can tell them as a manager, you're not going to make the decision. I'm going to make, or corporate's going to make the decision, but let's get out your concerns and maybe we can address some of those so we can make it easier on everyone. And maybe it's going to help with recruitment and retention because you felt like we listened to you, we've involved you, and maybe we can make some changes that's going to aid in the implementation.
Suzanne has a question related to that. She says, you talked earlier about what company wants, what the company may want from an employee, and what an employee may want from an organization with respect to hiring. Can you share more detail on how organizations can be successful with understanding the needs of both? How does that work?
Yeah, that's really difficult. So as an organization, we say, well, what do we need? If I'm a hiring manager, I'm an organization, and now I'm in HR, I've got to hire an employee to do X, Y, or Z for 40 hours, and they're going to be in whatever environment they're going to be in. I think the real key to that is for the employee to really understand what that job is. And this helps with recruitment and retention, I think, at least in my experience. If the hiring manager is clear in what the job entails. Again, back to the beginning. Is it remote? Is it not remote? Is it in the office? Do you travel? What percentage you travel? The other thing that I witnessed last week was that the job was posted as traveling up to 70% of the time. In reality, it was traveling about 99% of the time.
Oh.
So, there's a real disconnect there between what's posted and what's reality. And I think the more the employee is a part of that, what daily life is really like, and sometimes that involves meeting other people in the department,
sure,
talking to the other people who had that position so they can understand what the position's about, because the worst thing for everyone is to hire someone, recruit someone, have them start, and have the job be so disconnected that it was actually advertised for and what the employee thought. And that happens more often than not, unfortunately.
Steve asked a really challenging question. Is the reluctance of employees to transfer geographically a reflection of diminished loyalty to the organization? As far as you understand, are people moving more for jobs or less, or what's happening out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it gets back, again, some of this, if you want to think of the generations, is generational, where we had, some in, certainly people in millennials haven't experienced this, but certainly the silent generation and the boomers have, where, the motto was, don't worry, stay in the organization will take care of you. And so the organization came first. Mm-hmm. Your needs kind of came second.
Yeah.
That's not the way it is now.
Right.
Now we're all working for number one, and the number one is me. Mm-hmm. And how do I fit in this? And if you want me to move to Nebraska to work, and I've never been in Nebraska or anywhere near Nebraska, and I'm an East Coast or a West Coast kind of person, Employees now are not going to be what they were maybe generations ago that would take that. They're going to say, well, if this is an exciting job and I really want to do it, I'll do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to move. I can find another job somewhere else. And I think that's what we're experiencing now, that although corporate wants you to take a job in a different state, if it's not a promotion and you're really doing the same thing, just in a different state, well, I don't know that that's as attractive as it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Certainly, it doesn't resonate with a lot of employees today.
Yeah, good question, Steve. Shout out to Suzanne, Teresa, Jim, Bob, Marcia, Ken, and Carolyn, who have asked some excellent questions, and some others that have come in here.
Great questions.
Organizational norms. We all hear this in discussions in politics and governance. Why is it important to establish organizational norms? Looking back at some of my previous employment situations, I don't recall ever being onboarded and talked about instructed or trained on how we communicate, what's normal around here, at least in an explicit way. It's usually something that you kind of sense. How do you establish communication norms in a workplace? I don't think you're going to find this in an employee handbook or training, right?
Yeah, you are. You will not. Some organizations are starting to get to this point where they're developing communication norms. So what are norms? Norms are the actions, beliefs, what is written, what is said, what is practiced, what is preached in the organization, how we behave. Mm-hmm. How does the organization behave? How does it behave to you as an employer, as an employee, and how do you as an employee behave in that environment? So for instance, I worked with an organization and they said, we will have open and honest communication that's direct. They had a problem with communication channels being sort of all over the place. So employees would hear things, they think of the old rumor mill. Before a policy was implemented, it was floated out there to someone, that someone told someone else, and you couldn't tell if it was a rumor or a fact. And so employees got together, and as you started from the beginning, this really has to come with employee involvement. Employees have to be a part of establishing communication norms because they are the ones that are going to know what the problems are in the organization with communication. Right? Mm-hmm. If you ask managers, leaders, C-suite, what's wrong with communication in the organization, they're going to have a totally different set of assumptions about what's wrong in the organization. Once you ask employees what's wrong with communication, you're going to begin to understand what that is. And so once you, either through focus groups or surveys or staff meetings, hear from your employees and they tell you how the organization acts and reacts and how it behaves and how it communicates, then you can start to tackle those, to develop norms of how you're going to act, react, and communicate with your employees. And we've got a lot of great examples recently, and you can see, unfortunately, on Twitter how some leaders communicate with their employees. And there's some classic cases like, we're going to start working 4 days a week, and employees are reading this on Twitter instead of hearing from their managers. Right. And that's not helpful for the culture and the climate of an organization.
Right. Or you're fired via Instagram.
Another,
I was thinking about the different channels that we use in our workplace. So I'll just be transparent. Here's where we use it at my workplace: Slack, productivity software, collaboration software, email, other platforms like Rike, which is sort of like a project management thing, phone, text, in person, etc. For each of those, I have a different way of communicating with people. If we're going to talk about something a little loose or relational, it may be by phone or email. I'm not going to, I'm not going to use my productivity platform, my project management platform, to talk about how somebody is not doing what they should do, or you know what I'm saying here. Those norms seem to be kind of sort of naturally established based on the function of the channel through which we communicate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really difficult. And I think it's made managers and leadership's job much more difficult.
I would think so.
Because you have to, and remember in the organization, it can be department specific, right? So one department can say, Slack is great, we communicate via Slack. And the other department and the manager says, no, we're not going to do Slack. I don't know it, I don't understand it, I don't believe it. And so for a variety of reasons, you can have in one organization 10 different departments that all communicate differently because their manager likes it this way or can respond or react. And the difficult part for a manager is to feel that connection, you may have to use multiple channels, which is much different than it's been years ago where you had, memos or emails or someone comes into your office or you have a staff meeting. Now you're doing about 10 different things to communicate with your workforce, but it gets back to you as a manager. How much of this do I need to do as a manager to be able to recruit and retain my staff?
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about organizational change. I find this fascinating. Some of the courses and certificate work that you've done with us in the university relate exactly to this. So when we talk about organizational change, change management specifically, what are we looking to understand? And there's so many different ways to talk about it, but we can talk about the different ways through which an organization changes. But how do you think about it as an instructor?
So I think of organizational change really back, kind of the foundation of it. If an organization needs to change, change is a scary word. So what are we changing for? Is it something that we want to be now that we weren't before? Are we changing because we've done surveys? If you want to think healthcare, if you want to think banking, because our clients in banking want access besides 9 to 5 access, or 8 to 4 access. We have to be available to our clients or customers outside of the normal day. We have to be available to our customers or clients on the weekends. And how do we do that? So the organization is going to change, in this case, based on consumer demands. That's really difficult for an organization, and dealing with that change is difficult because ultimately you may have to change the way people work. And what's expected of them. Like, I never signed up to work on the weekends. I never signed up to work evenings. And now you're asking me to do that. Or now you're asking me to communicate with my patients via a bot or via an automated teller instead of the customers going up to the teller to have a personal interaction. You're encouraging them to go to a big blue machine where there is a video of a teller in corporate office that handles their transactions. And so you don't have that face-to-face. There may not be that face-to-face opportunity. So organizational change is really trying to figure out what the organization, why they're changing, what they're trying to do now, and what is my role in the change.
You know, and if we think about back to the graphic too, different departments, different places have a varying capacity and patience and willingness to change. Think in lower left, the hierarchical, sort of maybe possibly operational side of things versus the entrepreneurial top right, people that have to work quick, agile, have some flexibility and all that, right? So it's the leader's job to bridge all those bridges.
Absolutely. And you may have employees that really don't want to deal with the change, right? So you may have some that have tuned out. You're making a major change initiative. They may have a couple years left to work, and they say to you, whatever you want to do is fine. I'll go along with it. My heart isn't into it. I really don't believe it. I'm leaving in a year or two or less. Maybe they tell you that. Maybe they vote with their feet, and they leave much sooner than that. Mm-hmm. So it's hard as a leader to know what you have buy-in for when you're undergoing organizational change. And then, does that change stick? If you had the change, kind of does it stick? It's that Lewin model where you have to change, unfreeze, refreeze again. What are the new behaviors that you have to do as an employee that you have to exhibit to be a part of this organization? And that change is very difficult for people.
In our pregame huddle, we were talking about the various leadership styles. Again, going back, hierarchical. The CEO makes all the decisions, not much input, really not interested in collaborative approaches to organizational strategy, for instance, right? Or there's the other model, the entrepreneurial, open, let's keep it open, let's crowdsource all the ideas and then figure out how to amalgamate them and turn them into something. There's no secret formula, but is there a balance to be stricken? What do you see out there among organizations that you talk to? Is the top-down, I don't want to mischaracterize, authoritative style as in vogue as it may have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think it still has a role in organizations. Certainly, that's displayed in organizations all around the world. Yep. That model works, and if it works, what's the impetus to change it? Like you wouldn't change that hierarchical model if the board, the CEO is successful, if the organization is productive and profitable, if the board's satisfied with the CEO's performance. Well, who's going to disrupt that? Different from if the organization's struggling, the board puts a new CEO in, they have to do a change because the culture was determined to be sick. sick, whatever that means. And it means something different to everyone. And a new leader comes in and really changes the way the organization works. And maybe now they're more participatory, they're less top-down, there's more collaboration. That's the part of organizational change that kind of goes with the leader's leadership style. So it really depends on that leadership style. And some leaders, frankly, and you can see this when they go from organization to organization, or if they were the chief operating officer in an organization and it was very hierarchical, and now they were tapped to be the CEO of this new organization that wasn't hierarchical, but they're bringing their skills and competencies and comfort level from their past organization, their previous organization. So when they come to this new organization, now it's going to be top down. Now there's a tremendous amount of organizational change because the leader is matching his style with what his or her style with what he expects how the organization should perform. And he or she may like this top-down approach, which is very different than the way that organization functioned. But that's the new leader desire, and that's the way that they're going to operate. And then as an employee, we have to determine how we fit in that. Do we still fit? Do we like it? Maybe our department is isolated still from that, and we can act very collaboratively and I'm happy, or maybe it's not. Maybe now the top-down affects me and I don't like it, and I'm gonna leave.
When we talk about shared vision, we're talking about an organizational, we've been talking internally the whole time right now, right? We haven't really talked about what a shared vision means externally to our customers, to our client, to the public, to the world, right? So I'm thinking about shared vision, and I'm thinking about environmental social governance, ESG, sustainability, making your company attractive to consumers and clients, those who you interact with, so that you're all sort of sharing a vision. Do you ever think about things this way?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that gets to the part of the employee involvement. What do the employees feel good about? So not only do they feel good about working, but they feel good about the environment and social change, and they want to be a part of an organization that believes in that as well. Not only believes in it, takes an active role in it. So in the environment, what's the employee's role? The employee likes to have a role in the environment, in conservation, and maybe the employer actually implements this and acts that way. So part of their sort of makeup, their DNA, is being a part of the community and making actions and policies and procedures that help the environment. So sometimes those can go hand in hand, and certainly that obviously will help with recruitment and retention and having employees feel connected to the organization.
So I want to chime in really quickly. I'm gonna take a wild right turn here. We haven't really thought about this yet, but I want to ask my audience what they think of this production style. So for those of you who have checked in previous keynotes, we've had various studio setups here. Sometimes I'm alone at a table. Sometimes I've got a guest by my side. Sometimes we have graphics that are sort of represented differently. Sometimes eye contact is different. We're all having conversations about that. I thought it would be important to take a moment. So enter in the chat what you think. If you've seen previous keynotes and you liked how things looked before and you can't stand our headphones or the way that the setup works, let us know. Or if you prefer, you think things sound better, production value has gone up or down, let us know. I'm very much interested in your feedback, as we always are. And I should mention, too, that at the end of the show, we're going to kick up a QR code so that you can give us a rating. How'd we do? And give us some instructive feedback as well. This is something that we always try to do and iterate and collaborate and have an open model, Nick.
Yeah, it's great.
It's
been fun.
Good. I have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
So thinking about the Change Management Leader Certificate, I want to talk broadly about who that sort of education might benefit the most, but also maybe what are the greatest pain points for people that have to manage change? Maybe some of the qualities that might benefit a leader the most when they're in a volatile market, have to make sweeping organizational changes. What are some of the policies that the concepts, the competencies that you like to impart to students?
Yeah, I think, and this really hasn't changed in the 20 years I've been teaching or the 25 years that I've been working. The most difficult part of management is having difficult conversations with employees. And definitely, I don't think that that's easy. I don't think it's gotten any easier. I think it's difficult to have to counsel employees or terminate employees or correct poor performance. I think it presents an exciting opportunity to take an employee who maybe isn't doing that well and turn him into a star performer or above average, but it's very difficult. The human resources part of employee discipline has always been, and I think will continue to be, extremely difficult. And that's very taxing and trying on managers. It's not a fun part of their job. It's something that pains them. It's something that leads to their dissatisfaction because these are difficult conversations that nobody likes to have.
Conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Does this figure into some of the work that you do? I want to ask you, excuse me, to what degree things like emotional intelligence are thought about, whether it's in an individual leader, sort of imparting these qualities, making these things institutional values. Thinking about emotional intelligence, the ability to resolve conflict, because it's inevitable. We're going to have to deal with it. That kind of thing. Is it something that people get involved in training and kind of working on what would otherwise be considered very soft skills? Right,
absolutely.
What do you think?
And those managers that have those soft skills obviously have an advantage. So
Sure.
I've done a lot of work with employees, especially department-wide, sometimes organization-wide, when there's a lot of conflict. And that's really sitting down with the employees and understanding, what's the conflict about? Is it about our goals? Is it about our strategy? Or is it about people? And then, the hard part about being a manager is you've got to kind of massage that, and you've got to figure out, well, is this something I can change? Is this something department specific, or is this something organization wide? So as the organization said, every department will implement X, Y, and Z, and now I've got to push that through to my staff, there may be very little that I can do. But definitely conflict resolution is very difficult. And I think the managers who can do a better job with that and understand their employees, it gets kind of back to that collaborative model that we talked about. Mm-hmm. I think they'll always have a little bit more satisfaction out of the job. They'll have a little bit more respect and likability from their employees. And I think their employees will stay. Back to that recruitment and retention. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't want to work for a boss that respects them, likes them, and treats them fairly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I know you're not an economist, but I want to ask you some questions related to that because I can't help but be curious about things. Job mobility keeps getting, people's tenure at organizations keeps sort of shrinking. Yep. Employment rates up or down, depending on where, they're the lowest they've been in years currently. Any thoughts on where we're at as it relates to those things? Will people ever stay in jobs longer?
Yeah.
What's going on?
It's crazy now because
Yeah.
I remember when I first started, and I remember my professors telling me, when you take your first job, whether you like it or not, you better stay there for 3 years because an employer is going to think X, Y, and Z of you if you leave after a year. So you got to stay 3 years. In your second one, stay 5, and then go 10 or more years. And that's kind of the track. And we all heard that. And now, when I look at resumes, there are people who are at 10 different places in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so there isn't that. And I think for the employers now, the employers that once said, well, you got to stay somewhere for 3 or 5 years, that isn't the norm. So hiring managers and people are used to seeing this turnover. The key is, well, why did you leave? And joining this other organization, can we do anything differently that'll make you stay longer? That'll make you stay for 5 years instead of a year? Like what didn't work at the last place? And then to think about, do we have anything that we can offer you that'll make you stay?
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to teaching at Cornell, among the students that you teach, is there something unique about the particular approach, either within the college itself that you work in or I don't know, something unique to the way you approach leadership and things like shared vision that you learned from having worked at Cornell?
I'm learning every day. So the students are great. So I have I have those that are in the more traditional after undergraduate, they go right into graduate school, and I have a cohort of them in the MHA program, and then I have the EMHA program. So people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, going back and getting their degree. So these are people who are already leaders, managers, CEOs of their respective industry, a lot of physicians as well, and they're going back to get a graduate degree to continue to move up or to learn how to better function in their organization. So I learn a lot from them. We have great discussions with students in sort of both cohorts, and that is, it's the energy that they have, especially the ones who haven't been in the job market yet. Is like, how do I find an employer? How do I find the right employer? I'm going to go do an internship. They learn so much from those experiences, and then you temper that with those in the EMHA, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are already maybe senior managers. They have different expectations, and they're in school for different reasons. So I'm learning every day. It's a fascinating group of students that I get to work with.
So I'm not asking you to name names, but can you provide an example of a case study of an organization that does have a very good shared vision that really is highly functional from top down? I know that maybe you're not running and consulting those businesses that have that perfectly executed shared vision, but what does it look like? What do we aspire to do here?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. One of the organizations that I worked with having trouble with, they wanted to establish communication norms because they did a lot of surveys for the employees that were not very favorable to their managers and weren't very favorable about how they were treated in relation to others. And when we talked about sort of the root causes, the employees said, we don't get treated with respect. Communication is one way. I want a voice. Doesn't necessarily mean I have to make the decision, but it would be great for people to ask me what my opinion is before we roll this out. So for instance, if you want me to work on Saturdays and Sundays, can that be an option? Or you're going to put our names in a hat, or is the computer going to decide, so Chris, you're picked this week, I'm picked the next? Because if we can decide who works, maybe we can have volunteers. Maybe I'll never have to work. Or on the other hand, maybe now I'm at a different point in life. I don't have as many things going on with the family. Maybe I want to work on the weekends for extra money if that's an option.
Yeah.
So it's about establishing communication norms with that department that I worked with. How do we want to be treated? How can we be involved in decision making? Do we have a voice? What is that voice? How does our manager interact with us? And how can we get together on a more frequent basis? In this case, they went from no staff meetings at all to having at least monthly staff meetings so they could come together and talk about where's the department going, where's the organization going, what are the new initiatives planned. And it was amazing that they never really came together as a group, not even on a monthly basis. They knew nothing what was going on from corporate other than what they read in a newsletter.
Sounds like they're just getting started on their journey, to tell you the truth, right? There's a lot of evolution to take place.
Absolutely.
We just did a keynote on Monday. I hate to refer to something outside of our ecosystem right here, but we did a keynote on gamification as it relates to employee engagement, and everything else that comes with that, retention, recruitment, et cetera. And this is, there's various forms that it can take. But one of the takeaways is the more that people are involved, that they're rewarded with certain recognition and have fun at their jobs with it, and everything that comes with that. You're facing a new challenge. I know at its simplest form, sales managers or technical salespeople are given the equivalent of a gold star or money or whatever it might be. But gamification, I think on its most simple level, really works. Have you had any experience with this? And there's the basic level, right? The employee of the month gets to park next to the CEO right in front of the entrance. Everything from that to full-on dashboards on people assuming, aliases, being part of mythical guilds within the organization. What's your experience with this?
Yeah, my experience goes back to when I was a manager. So one of the things we did, and then I'll tell you some recent research that I've done with employees. So as a manager, one of the things that we used to do is we used to survey employees to think about what financial and non-financial incentives do you not have now that you would like to have?
Sure. Because
sometimes you don't know. So you can ask and see what they say, and I think as a manager, you'd be surprised at what some of those are, not just financial, but non-financial. But one of the things that we used to do around the holidays was to give all our employees a $100 gift card to the local supermarket. More employees talked about that than they talked about the increases that they got. It was just an act of kindness. It came out of the blue, and we would just do it every holiday season. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was some form of appreciation. So I think asking the question sometimes will allow you to come up with things that maybe as a leader you're not going to come up with on your own.
Yeah.
And so that's really fascinating. The other funny story was doing a lot of surveys with employees. The one common denominator, as you mentioned, what does everyone want, regardless of what generation you are? If you ask them, everyone wants more money, right? So if you ask, do you want more money? Well, of course they do want more money. Who doesn't want more money at the end of the day?
Yeah.
So I think that's the one constant among generations that people can feel good about. And if you have the ability to give more money, you probably ought to give more money.
Yeah, you'll be that much closer to a shared vision,
Exactly.
I'm sure. All right, perfect. Lovely to have you, Nick Fabrizio. Great to have you in the studio. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, audience, so it's your time for the input. Please give us some feedback on how we did, give us a rating, and let us know how we did. And we'll see you next time on the next keynote. Thank you so much.